So you've decided that you want a divorce. What are the next steps? The first thing you have to ensure is that you have been married for at least 1 year. The courts generally will not consider divorce petitions for persons who have been married for less than a year unless the petitioner can demonstrate a circumstance of extreme hardship. The second is that one of the parties to the divorce petition must be resident in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, I refer to the persons as parties. Who are the parties to a divorce? One person is the petitioner. That is the person who initiates the divorce, who files for divorce. The second person is the respondent. That is the other spouse. Contrary to popular belief, there is only one ground for divorce in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is the irretrievable breakdown of the marriage, which is just another way of saying that the issues in the marriage are so great that it is now beyond repair. Now, in order for a court to be satisfied that this is in fact the case, the petitioner must rely on one of the following conditions. The first is adultery. Now, in adultery, that particular petition may get a little messy because, in addition to your name as the petitioner and the respondent's name, which is your spouse, you generally have to list the owner man or the outside woman as a co-respondent on that petition. Now, the ground is there for you to use if you can prove that there was adultery and you really cannot live with that. But again, it lends itself to a bit more bacchanal. The second condition is that the respondent has demonstrated unreasonable behavior, so much so that the petitioner cannot live with that kind of behavior. Usually, if you're relying on this particular condition, you see circumstances of abuse, financial, emotional, physical, mental, verbal abuse. I've also seen circumstances where the petitioner was not sexually satisfied by the respondent, and again, you have to employ the reasonableness test. So, is this behavior unreasonable? So, if you have a situation whereby the wife, for example, wants to have sex 5 times a week, and the husband, only wants to have sex twice a week, that is not really an issue of unreasonable behavior. It could be dissatisfaction, but not unreasonable behavior. Unreasonable behavior is like if you don't have sexual relations for months or years, in the absence of some kind of medical condition. So the third ground is desertion. And this is desertion by the respondent of the petitioner for at least 2 years immediately prior to filing the action. And desertion in most cases is your spouse just walked out of the home and, you hear that they're living there. You're not sure. But they're no longer living with you as, husband and wife. The fourth condition is that parties have lived apart continuously for 2 years immediately prior to filing the petition. This is one of the least messiest conditions because both parties agree prior to even approaching the court that, okay, it's not working out, we're going to get a divorce. And they usually come to some sort of agreement in relation to the matrimonial home, if any, children, if any, assets, etc. So by the time they get to court, it's like kind of cut and dry. Also, prior to going to court, the respondent must sign something called a consent form. And that is attached to a bundle of documents, and you present that to the court. In other jurisdictions, you have something called a no-fault divorce. This particular condition is the closest thing that we have to a no-fault divorce. The fifth condition is that both parties must have been living apart for a continuous period of 5 years immediately prior to filing the action. I see this particular condition used when one party wants a divorce and the other party does not want to consent to the divorce. So what happens is that the petitioner, bides his or her time for 5 years, and when that 5 year mark hits, then they file the petition. Now, I just want to note that in terms of conditions 4 and 5 with living apart doesn't mean that you have to live in separate homes. You can live in the same home and still satisfy that condition of living apart. It is that you're leading separate lives. It's almost like a situation where you are roommates. It's a platonic friendship relationship. Of course, no sexual relations involved. So this was the first installment of what would be a series of videos on divorce. And I want you to check me out on your various social media, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram at Law and More TT. So until the next time, bye.